What if I told you that one of the greatest prophecies about Jesus isn't found in Isaiah, but hidden in the middle of First Chronicles? Most people skip these chapters because they seem like a collection of government records. But when you look closer, you see that God makes an eternal promise to David, and David begins preparing for a kingdom that he himself will never see. At first, these stories seem unrelated, but together they tell one incredible message. God was preparing the way for the king who would reign forever. David wants to build God a temple, but God says no. He says that task is not for David to do. Instead of David building a house for God, God promises to build David a house, an everlasting royal dynasty. This is the Davidic covenant, one of the most important promises in all of Scripture. While Solomon would carry it on by building the temple, Jesus would ultimately fulfill it completely as the eternal king. David responds with remarkable humility. Instead of questioning God's no, he worships. But God's promise wouldn't remain just words. In the very next chapter, he begins proving his faithfulness on the battlefield. David defeats the Philistines, Moabites, Syrians, and Edomites because the Lord gave him victory wherever he went. Chronicles isn't celebrating military genius, it's celebrating God's covenant faithfulness. David also dedicates the spoils of war to the Lord instead of enriching himself. These victories established Israel as the dominant kingdom in the region for the first time, fulfilling the promises God had made generations earlier. But not every battle is fought with swords. The next chapter begins with kindness and ends in tragedy. Begins when David sends ambassadors to create goodwill with a new king after his father's death. Corrupt advisors convince the new king that David's servants are spies, and the ambassadors are humiliated, a declaration of war in the ancient world. What follows is a massive conflict that could have been avoided entirely. David and his men prepare wisely, but ultimately they trust God's sovereignty. David wins another battle, but his greatest enemy isn't outside Israel. It's inside his own heart. This chapter records more victories over the Philistines, including the defeat of several descendants of the giants. These battles remind Israel that the God who defeated Goliath is still fighting for his people. One interesting detail: David isn't the hero in every battle anymore. Healthy leadership prepares the next generation instead of doing everything alone. God's kingdom advances when faithful people equip others. But then everything changes with one decision David never should have made. The problem isn't counting people, it's trusting numbers instead of trusting God. David begins placing confidence in military strength rather than the Lord, and judgment follows. But God's mercy shines even brighter. The plague he sent brings David to the location, which becomes the future site of Solomon's temple. The place where God's judgment stopped became the place where the sacrifices for sin would continue for centuries. Even our greatest failures cannot stop God's redemptive plan. Now David knows exactly where God's house will stand, even though he'll never build it. God tells David that his son will build the temple because David was a man of war. But instead of becoming bitter, David spends enormous energy preparing everything Solomon will need, including materials, workers, plans, and resources. David spent the end of his life preparing for a future beyond himself. His obedience blessed generations he would never meet. And David's final preparations reveal something every believer needs to understand about serving God. David organizes the Levites for temple ministry. At first glance, this chapter feels like administrative paperwork, but it's actually about worship. God is holy. Worship isn't random. Everyone has a purpose, every role matters, every servant contributes. The kingdom flourishes when God's people faithfully serve where He has placed them. Whether our role seems public or hidden, every act of faithful service matters to God. These chapters may seem like they're about David, but they're really about someone greater. David wanted to build God a house, but Jesus became God's dwelling among us. David defeated Israel's enemies. Jesus defeated sin and death. David prepared the temple. Jesus became the true temple where God meets his people. David organized priests to offer sacrifices. Jesus became both our perfect high priest and the final sacrifice. David's kingdom eventually faded, but Jesus sits forever on David's throne, exactly as God promised. Throughout these chapters, one truth echoes again and again: God always keeps his promises. He kept his promise to David, and he fulfilled his greatest promise in Jesus Christ.